This is the presentation for Chapter 3 of the Microbes and Society course, and it deals with the molecules of the cell, the building blocks of life. This is by no means a chemistry course, but there are certain things that you need to understand about chemistry to be able to understand how life and microorganisms function. So, what we look for in learning this chapter is that you should be able to understand and appreciate the role of water in the formation and function of the molecules of the cell. Water is a critical component in all cells. It is the environment that the other chemicals are dissolved in, and it allows for things to happen. Understand the role of polymerization and dehydration. That is, actions that build up molecules. I'm sorry, dehydration synthesis. Uh, know what the names of the major macromolecules of the cell are and their basic function, and recognize that polysaccharides, that's long chain sugars, are not only important but for energy sources, but a significant component in cell walls. Additionally, you should appreciate the role of the phospholipids in membrane formation. Recognize that proteins carry out most of the functions of the cells by serving as enzymes, serving as pumps, molecules involved in transporting materials, etc. And understand that DNA is the molecule that contains the information on how to make proteins. Now, start out, you need a basic understanding of what an atom is. An atom is the smallest structure that you can have of an element and still maintain its unique characteristics of that element. And it's composed of three important components. There are the neutrons, and they don't have any charge whatsoever. Then there are protons, which are positively charged. Now, neutrons and protons have a certain amount of mass, about equal to one another. When we are talking about the mass of an atom, we are counting up the number of protons and neutrons that exist in that atom. Electrons also have a charge. They are negatively charged, as opposed to protons, which are positively charged. They contain very little mass at all, and so it's not an important factor in evaluating the overall mass of an atom. Now, atoms make molecules, and so we can connect two or more atoms together and get molecular substances. Now, the basic building blocks of life include molecules of water, which is two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom, and it is the most common inorganic molecule. Now, when I say inorganic, I'm talking about substances that do not contain the atom carbon. Organic molecules contain carbon. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that there are several important organic molecules, or macromolecules, because some of them are quite large. Inorganic substances tend to be small. Carbohydrates, we call it a carbohydrate because there's one water molecule per carbon. Now, these can be quite large. There are monosaccharides, polysaccharides, long chains like starch. We have proteins. They also have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They may also contain sulfur, and all of them contain nitrogen. We have lipids, and like carbohydrates, they have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but the proportions are a little bit different. And then there are nucleic acids. Like proteins, they contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and phosphorus. They make up the genetic material that's in a cell, and that includes DNA and RNA. Water is inorganic. Like I said before, it does not contain carbon. It has the molecular formula of H2O. It is absolutely necessary for life. Life on this planet could not exist without water. In fact, you are made up between 50 and about 65% water. Now, most reactions occur in water because the chemical compounds are suspended in water, and water actually is part of the reaction. If you want to put our two molecules together to make a longer chain, the easiest way to do it is to take out a molecule of water. If you want to break apart, the easiest way to do it is to add a molecule of water. Water has some unique qualities that help it support life. Is made up of a polar molecule, which means that water is attracted to itself. So it has surface tension. The fact that it is a polar molecule also means that it's a very good solvent. Things can dissolve in water very well. It is less dense when it freezes, and because it has surface tension, it has a cushioning effect. The attraction of one molecule to another also means that it can absorb a great deal of heat without changing temperature. Now, the organic molecules are required for a variety of reasons. They're required to be broken down into nutrients. They are used to synthesize other molecules that we might use. They're used for genetic memory so that one cell can reproduce and have a cell identical to it. So it has genetic memory in the form of DNA. It's used for structural components. And proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids all are structural components, and for functional components. The carbohydrates. If I refer to something as a polysaccharide, that is a long chain of sugars. And when we're talking about carbohydrates, what we're talking about are sugars. They may also be referred to as saccharides. We have monosaccharides, which are one sugar. They usually have 3 to 7 carbons. And keep in mind that there is a molecule of water for each of those carbons. The ones that are really relevant to us are pentose sugars. That is, they have 5 carbons, and they live in ribose and deoxyribose, which are the nucleic acids. And then there are hexoses, which are 6 carbons. And we have glucose, which is the major energy source for cells. They will break down other substances to form glucose before feeding that into their energy cycle. Then we have fructose, which is a sugar in plants and fruits. We also have galactose. Now, if we are going to put these together, we use, again, this dehydration synthesis. And what we do is we remove water, and that allows us to link one sugar to another. And in doing so, we can make disaccharides. That is, 2 monosaccharides. These are the ones that you may be more familiar with. Maltose, lactose, which is in milk, and sucrose, which is table sugar. We also have polysaccharides, which are long chains of sugars. These exist in plants, they exist in microorganisms, and in the case of chitin, that's actually a structural component in some exoskeletons of sea life. Polysaccharides include cellulose, which is a structural component in many plants. We have glycogen. It is a long chain of glucose molecules, and we store energy in our liver in the form of glycogen. And we have starches, which is also a plant energy storage molecule. Structural polysaccharides, I just mentioned. Cellulose, which is in plant. Chitin, in some shellfish. There's also peptidoglycan, in the cell walls of some microorganisms. Lipids are another important component, and what we have are triglycerides. These consist of a molecule of glycerol and chains of fatty acids. 3 chains of fatty acids, actually. Fat tissue contains triglycerides. There are some other important lipids. Phospholipids. They make up the cell membranes. They make up about 60% of the membrane that surrounds each of the cells. They are made up of glycerol, fatty acids, and a phosphate group. Now, cells are largely water. Our bodies are largely water, and we've heard all our lives that oil and water don't mix. But because they have this phosphate group on them, they have one side of the molecule that likes water and the other side that does not like water. When you have a situation like that, we call that amphipathic. And as a result, what will happen is that these molecules will line up so that the sides that don't like water are back to one another. They exclude the water, whereas the sides that like water can be either on the inside or the outside of the cell. We also have steroids. The steroids are derived from cholesterol. They are a structural component of many cells. They are bigger than the phospholipids, and they have branches that spread out so it helps stiffen the cell. They're also the basis of certain hormones and vitamins in our body. Vitamin D is derived from cholesterol. Hormones including testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are also derived from cholesterol. This is just a graphic of a phospholipid. And as you can see, we have the fatty acid tails. In this case, instead of having 3 as we would in a triglyceride, we only have 2. We have our glycerol, and then we have the phosphate group that's attached to it. And as a result, this end is very fond of water. That end hates water. And this is what that bilayer looks like. So we have water on the outside, we have water on the inside, and we have them backing up to one another in such a way that they eliminate water in between them. You should know the subunits of each of these. So when I say carbohydrates, you should know that they are made up of monosaccharides. When I say fats, you should know triglycerides and phospholipids and steroids. And in proteins, the subunits that we're looking at here are amino acids. Amino acids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and some of them contain sulfur as well. The process of building a protein, which is really a functional or structural component in cells, involves putting these individual amino acids together to form a string. And in the way that that is done is a process called dehydration synthesis, where we take out a molecule of water. We would take an OH group off of one molecule, an H group off of another, and that gives us H2O, and then we would have a combined amino acid structure. A long chain of this would be a polypeptide, also known as a protein. The bond specific to this is referred to as a peptide bond. We're going to stop here and continue with our discussion on protein structure in our next presentation.